The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the quiet suburban street. The air was crisp, and the faint sound of laughter echoed from a nearby park. But for one young girl, the walk home from school was anything but peaceful. She clutched her backpack tightly, her steps quickening as she noticed a group of older boys loitering near the corner. They were the kind of kids everyone in the neighborhood knew to avoid: loud, brash, and always looking for trouble. She tried to slip past them, her heart pounding in her chest, but one of them stepped in front of her, blocking her path. "Hey, were you going in such a hurry?" he sneered, his voice dripping with mockery. The others laughed, forming a loose circle around her. She froze, her eyes darting around for an escape, but there was none. The leader of the group, a tall boy with a cocky grin, leaned in closer. "You think you're too good to talk to us or something?" Tears welled up in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She knew her older brother would be waiting for her at home, and she didn't want to worry him. But the bullies didn't care. They started taunting her, their words cutting deeper than any physical blow. "Maybe we should teach you a lesson," one of them said, his voice low and threatening. Unbeknownst to them, someone was watching from the shadows. Her brother, a quiet and unassuming teenager, had been waiting for her at the usual spot. He had seen the bullies approach and felt a surge of anger rise within him. But he didn't act immediately. Instead, he observed, his mind racing. He had spent years training in martial arts, not for glory or recognition, but to protect those he loved. And now, that moment had come. As the bullies closed in on his sister, he stepped out of the shadows, his presence calm but commanding. "Leave her alone," he said, his voice steady but firm. The bullies turned, surprised by his sudden appearance. They recognized him, the quiet kid who always kept to himself. They laughed, thinking he was an easy target. "What are you gonna do about it?" the leader challenged, puffing out his chest. The brother didn't respond with words. Instead, he positioned himself between the bullies and his sister, his stance relaxed but ready. The bullies hesitated, sensing something they hadn't noticed before, a quiet confidence that made them uneasy. But their pride wouldn't let them back down. The leader lunged forward, swinging a wild punch. What happened next was a blur. The brother moved with precision, deflecting the blow and using the bully's momentum against him. In seconds, the leader was on the ground, stunned and humiliated. The other bullies stared in shock, their bravado crumbling. The brother didn't gloat or press the advantage. He simply looked at them, his eyes calm but piercing. "If you ever mess with my sister again, you'll regret it," he said quietly. The bullies backed away, muttering apologies and excuses as they scrambled to leave. The sister looked at her brother, her fear replaced by awe. She had always known he was special, but she had never seen this side of him before. He turned to her, his expression softening. "You okay?" he asked, his voice gentle now. She nodded, still too shaken to speak. He put an arm around her shoulders and guided her home, the street now quiet and still. As they walked, the brother couldn't help but feel a mix of emotions: relief that his sister was safe, anger that she had been threatened, and a quiet pride in knowing he had done what was necessary. But he also knew this wasn't the end. The bullies might come back, and next time, they might not be alone. He would need to be ready. For now, though, he focused on his sister, making sure she felt safe and protected. The sun had fully set by the time they reached their house, the warm glow of the porch light welcoming them home. But the events of the evening had changed something, not just for the brother and sister, but for the entire neighborhood. Word of what had happened would spread, and the quiet teenager who had stood up to the bullies would become a symbol of courage and strength. But for now, the night was quiet, and the brother knew he had done what he had trained for all those years, to protect the ones he loved. The brother's journey to that moment on the street hadn't been easy. Growing up in a neighborhood where trouble seemed to lurk around every corner, he had learned early on that the world wasn't always fair. His family didn't have much, but they had each other, and that was enough. His father, a hard-working man with a quiet strength, had always been his role model. He remembered the day his father stood up to a group of men who had tried to intimidate their family. Though his father wasn't a fighter, his calm resolve and unwavering principles left a lasting impression on the young boy. It was after that incident that the brother decided he wanted to be strong, not just physically, but in character. He didn't want to be someone who relied on anger or violence to solve problems. He wanted to be someone who could protect his family and stand up for what was right, just like his father. That's when he discovered martial arts. At first, it was just a way to channel his energy and stay out of trouble. But as he trained, he realized it was much more than that. It taught him discipline, patience, and the importance of controlling his emotions. He started training in secret, not wanting to draw attention to himself. Every evening after school, he would head to a small, rundown gym tucked away in an alley. The gym was run by an older man who had once been a champion fighter. He saw potential in the quiet teenager and took him under his wing. Martial arts isn't about fighting, the coach would say. It's about understanding yourself and respecting others. It's about knowing when to stand your ground and when to walk away. The brother took those words to heart. He trained tirelessly, pushing himself to his limits. There were days when he wanted to give up, when his muscles ached and his spirit felt drained. But he kept going, driven by the thought of being able to protect his family. His younger sister, who was always full of energy and curiosity, became his biggest motivation. She looked up to him, and he couldn't bear the thought of letting her down. As the years passed, the brother grew stronger, not just in body but in mind. He learned to control his temper, to think before he acted. He became the kind of person who could defuse a tense situation with a few calm words. But he also knew that there were times when words weren't enough. That's why he kept training, honing his skills, preparing for the day when he might need to use them. The neighborhood they lived in was far from perfect. Gangs, drugs, and violence were a constant presence, and it was easy to get caught up in it all. But the brother stayed focused. He had seen too many friends fall into that life, and he didn't want to end up like them. He wanted something better, for himself and for his family. His sister, who was now in middle school, was his constant reminder of why he had to stay strong. She was smart and full of dreams, and he was determined to make sure nothing stood in her way. The night of the confrontation with the bullies had been a turning point. It wasn't just about standing up to them, it was about proving to himself that all those years of training had been worth it. As he walked home with his sister, he couldn't help but think about everything that had led him to that moment. He thought about his father, who had taught him the value of standing up for what's right. He thought about his coach, who had shown him the true meaning of strength. And he thought about his sister, whose safety and happiness meant more to him than anything else. But he also knew that the fight wasn't over. The bullies might come back, and next time, they might not be alone. He would need to be ready, not just for himself but for his sister and his family. As they reached their house, he made a silent promise to himself, no matter what happened, he would never let fear dictate his actions. He would stand tall, not just as a fighter, but as a protector, a brother, and a son. The next day, the air in the neighborhood felt different. Word of the brothers' stand against the bullies had spread like wildfire. People whispered about it on street corners, in the local grocery store, and even at the bus stop. The quiet teenager who had always kept to himself was suddenly the talk of the town. But for the brother, life went on as usual. He woke up early, helped his sister get ready for school, and made sure she had everything she needed. He didn't care about the attention or the rumors. His only concern was keeping his family safe. As they walked to school together that morning, his sister seemed more relaxed than she had in weeks. She chatted excitedly about her classes and her friends, her earlier fear replaced by a sense of security. The brother listened quietly, a small smile playing on his lips. He was glad to see her happy, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The bullies hadn't shown their faces since the confrontation, but he knew better than to think it was over. People like them didn't back down easily. His suspicions were confirmed later that afternoon. As he walked home from school alone, he noticed a group of boys lingering near the park. They weren't the same ones from the other night, but they had the same look, tough, arrogant, and looking for trouble. The brother kept his head down and kept walking, hoping to avoid a confrontation. But as he passed by, one of them called out to him. "Hey, you're the guy who thinks he's tough, right?" The brother stopped and turned to face them. There were 5 of them, all older and bigger than him. He recognized one of them as the leader of a local gang, a guy known for his violent temper. The brother's heart raced, but he kept his expression calm. He knew this wasn't going to end well, but he also knew he couldn't back down. "Not now. I don't want any trouble," he said, his voice steady. "Just let me go home." The gang leader smirked and stepped closer. "You think you can mess with my boys and just walk away? You've got a lot to learn, kid." The brother took a deep breath, his mind racing. He knew he was outnumbered, but he also knew he had one advantage: his training. He had spent years preparing for moments like this, not because he wanted to fight, but because he wanted to protect. He glanced around, assessing the situation. The park was empty except for a few kids playing in the distance. There was no one to help him, but that was okay. He didn't need help. The gang leader made the first move, lunging at him with a wild punch. The brother sidestepped easily, using the man's momentum to throw him off balance. The others hesitated, surprised by his speed and precision. But they quickly recovered, surrounding him and attacking from all sides. The brother moved like a shadow, dodging blows and countering with precise strikes. He didn't aim to hurt them, just to defend himself and create an opening to escape. The fight was intense, but the brother's training paid off. He stayed calm and focused, using his surroundings to his advantage. At one point, he grabbed a fallen branch and used it to keep the gang members at bay. They were strong, but they were also reckless, and their lack of discipline worked against them. One by one, they started to back off, their confidence wavering. The gang leader, furious and humiliated, pulled out a knife. The brother's heart skipped a beat, but he didn't panic. He had trained for this too. He kept his eyes on the knife, waiting for the right moment. When the leader lunged at him, he sidestepped and disarmed him in one swift motion. The knife clattered to the ground, and the brother kicked it away. "This isn't worth it," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Walk away." The gang leader glared at him, his chest heaving with anger. But he knew he was beaten. He spat on the ground and motioned for his boys to leave. "This isn't over," he growled as they walked away. The brother watched them go, his body aching but his spirit unbroken. He knew the gang leader was right, this wasn't over. But he also knew he had proven something, not just to them but to himself. He wasn't just a quiet kid who kept to himself. He was someone who could stand up for what was right, even when the odds were against him. As he walked home, his mind was a whirlwind of emotions. He felt proud of what he had accomplished, but he also felt the weight of what lay ahead. The gang wouldn't forget this, and neither would he. But for now, he focused on the present. His sister was safe, and that was all that mattered. When he got home, his sister was waiting for him. She took one look at his bruised face and her eyes filled with tears. "What happened?" she asked, her voice trembling. The brother smiled and ruffled her hair. "Nothing I couldn't handle," he said. "Don't worry, everything's going to be okay." And for the first time in a long time, he believed it. The days that followed the confrontation in the park were tense. The brother knew the gang wouldn't let things go so easily, and he was right. Rumors began to circulate that the gang leader was planning something big, something that would make sure no one ever challenged him again. The brother tried to go about his daily life as usual, but he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every time he left the house, he scanned the streets, his senses on high alert. He knew he had to stay vigilant, not just for himself but for his sister. Meanwhile, the neighborhood was buzzing with talk of what had happened. People who had once turned a blind eye to the gang's activities were now speaking out. The brothers' courage had sparked something in them, a sense of hope that things could change. Parents who had been too afraid to let their kids play outside started organizing neighborhood watch groups. Local leaders began holding meetings to discuss ways to make the community safer. Even the police, who had been largely absent, started paying more attention. The brother didn't see himself as a hero. To him, he had just done what needed to be done. But to everyone else, he was a symbol of strength and resilience. People stopped him on the street to thank him, to shake his hand, to tell him how much he had inspired them. It was overwhelming, and he didn't know how to respond. He wasn't used to being in the spotlight, and part of him wished things would just go back to normal. But deep down, he knew that wasn't possible. The confrontation had changed everything, not just for him but for the entire neighborhood. It had shown people that they didn't have to live in fear, that they could stand up to the bullies and the gangs and take back their streets. And while the brother was proud of what he had started, he also felt the weight of responsibility. He knew that if things were going to change, it would take more than just one person. It would take all of them working together. One evening, as he was walking home from the gym, he noticed a group of kids gathered in the park. They were practicing martial arts moves, mimicking what they had heard about his fight with the gang. The brother stopped to watch, a small smile tugging at his lips. One of the kids noticed him and called out, "Hey, it's him. The guy who stood up to the gang." The others turned, their eyes wide with admiration. The brother hesitated, unsure of what to do. But then one of the kids asked, "Can you teach us how to fight like you?" The question caught him off guard. He had never thought of himself as a teacher, but as he looked at their eager faces, he realized this was his chance to make a real difference. He nodded and walked over, showing them a few basic moves. The kids listened intently, their enthusiasm contagious. Before he knew it, a small crowd had gathered, watching and learning. That night, as he lay in bed, the brother thought about what had happened. He realized that his fight with the gang wasn't just about protecting his sister or standing up for himself. It was about showing others that they had the power to change their lives, to stand up to the forces that tried to hold them down. And if teaching a few kids some self-defense moves could help them feel safer and more confident, then maybe it was worth it. The next day, he went back to the park, and this time, he brought his sister with him. She was hesitant at first, but as she watched the kids practicing, she started to relax. The brother showed her a few moves, and soon she was laughing and sparring with the others. It was the first time in weeks that he had seen her truly happy, and it filled him with a sense of pride and relief. As the days turned into weeks, the brothers' impromptu martial arts classes became a regular thing. More and more kids started showing up, and even some adults joined in. The park, once a place of fear and danger, became a place of learning and community. People started looking out for each other, and the sense of unity was palpable. But the brother knew that the gang was still out there, watching and waiting. He had heard rumors that they were planning something, and he knew it was only a matter of time before they made their move. He tried to prepare himself, both mentally and physically, for whatever was coming. But he also knew that he wasn't alone anymore. The neighborhood had his back, and together, they were stronger than any gang. One evening, as he was walking home from the gym, he noticed a group of kids gathered in the park. They were practicing martial arts moves, mimicking what they had heard about his fight with the gang. The brother stopped to watch, a small smile tugging at his lips. One of the kids noticed him and called out, "Hey, it's him. The guy who stood up to the gang." The others turned, their eyes wide with admiration. The brother hesitated, unsure of what to do. But then one of the kids asked, "Can you teach us how to fight like you?" The question caught him off guard. He had never thought of himself as a teacher, but as he looked at their eager faces, he realized this was his chance to make a real difference. He nodded and walked over, showing them a few basic moves. The kids listened intently, their enthusiasm contagious. Before he knew it, a small crowd had gathered, watching and learning. That night, as he lay in bed, the brother thought about what had happened. He realized that his fight with the gang wasn't just about protecting his sister or standing up for himself. It was about showing others that they had the power to change their lives, to stand up to the forces that tried to hold them down. And if teaching a few kids some self-defense moves could help them feel safer and more confident, then maybe it was worth it. The next day, he went back to the park, and this time, he brought his sister with him. She was hesitant at first, but as she watched the kids practicing, she started to relax. The brother showed her a few moves, and soon she was laughing and sparring with the others. It was the first time in weeks that he had seen her truly happy, and it filled him with a sense of pride and relief. As the days turned into weeks, the brothers' impromptu martial arts classes became a regular thing. More and more kids started showing up, and even some adults joined in. The park, once a place of fear and danger, became a place of learning and community. People started looking out for each other, and the sense of unity was palpable. But the brother knew that the gang was still out there, watching and waiting. He had heard rumors that they were planning something, and he knew it was only a matter of time before they made their move. He tried to prepare himself, both mentally and physically, for whatever was coming. But he also knew that he wasn't alone anymore. The neighborhood had his back, and together, they were stronger than any gang. One evening, as he was leaving the park after a training session, he noticed a figure standing in the shadows. It was the gang leader, his expression unreadable. The brother tensed, ready for a fight, but the man didn't move. Instead, he just stood there, watching. After a long moment, he nodded slightly and walked away. The brother didn't know what to make of it, but he felt a strange sense of closure. Maybe the gang leader had realized that the neighborhood wasn't afraid anymore, that they were ready to stand up for themselves. Or maybe he was just biding his time, waiting for the right moment to strike. Either way, the brother knew he had to stay ready. As he walked home that night, he felt a sense of hope that he hadn't felt in a long time. The neighborhood was changing, and he had played a part in that. But he also knew that the fight wasn't over. There would always be challenges, always be people who tried to bring others down. But as long as they stood together, as long as they refused to give in to fear, they could overcome anything. And for the first time in a long time, the brother felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be. The brother's life had become a whirlwind of activity. Between school, his part-time job, and the growing martial arts classes in the park, he barely had time to catch his breath. But he didn't mind. The classes had become more than just a way to teach self-defense, they had become a symbol of hope for the neighborhood. Parents who had once been too afraid to let their kids outside now watched proudly as their children learned discipline, confidence, and respect. The park, once a place of fear, had transformed into a hub of positivity and community. But despite the progress, the brother couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming. The gang leader's silent presence in the shadows that night had left him uneasy. He knew the man wasn't the type to back down easily, and the brother couldn't help but wonder what his next move would be. He tried to push the thoughts aside, focusing instead on the good he was doing. But the tension was always there, lurking beneath the surface. One evening, as he was wrapping up a training session, he noticed a familiar figure standing at the edge of the park. It was the gang leader, but this time, he wasn't alone. He had brought a few of his boys with him, and they were watching the class with a mix of curiosity and skepticism. The brother's heart raced, but he forced himself to stay calm. He finished the session, dismissing the kids with a smile, and then turned to face the gang leader. The man stepped forward, his hands in his pockets, his expression unreadable. The brother braced himself for a confrontation, but instead, the gang leader spoke. "You've got a lot of nerve, kid," he said, his voice low but not threatening. "Turning this place into your little dojo. You think you're some kind of hero?" The brother didn't respond immediately. He studied the man's face, trying to gauge his intentions. "I'm not a hero," he said finally. "I'm just trying to make things better." The gang leader snorted, but there was no malice in it. "Better for who? You think a few karate moves are gonna fix this neighborhood?" "It's not about the moves," the brother replied. "It's about giving people a chance to feel safe. To stand up for themselves." The gang leader was silent for a moment, his eyes narrowing as he considered the brother's words. Then he nodded toward the park bench. "Sit down. Let's talk." The brother hesitated, unsure of what to expect. But something in the man's tone made him think this wasn't a trap. He sat down, keeping a safe distance, and waited for the gang leader to speak. The man sighed, running a hand over his face. "You remind me of myself," he said finally. "When I was your age, I thought I could change the world too. But life doesn't work like that. You fight, and for what? Nothing ever changes." The brother listened quietly, sensing that the man was speaking from a place of pain. "Maybe nothing changes because we keep doing the same things," he said carefully. "Maybe it's time to try something different." The gang leader looked at him, his expression softening slightly. "You think it's that easy?" "No," the brother admitted. "But it's worth a try. If we keep fighting each other, nothing's ever gonna get better. But if we work together, maybe we can make a difference." The gang leader was silent for a long time, his gaze fixed on the ground. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, almost hesitant. "I didn't come here to fight you," he said. "I came here to see what all the fuss was about. And maybe to say I'm sorry." The brother blinked, surprised by the admission. "Sorry for what?" "For a lot of things," the man said. "For being part of the problem. For not seeing that there's another way." He paused, then added, "You've got guts, kid. More than I ever did at your age. Maybe you're onto something." The brother didn't know what to say. He had expected anger, threats, maybe even violence. But this was something he hadn't prepared for. He took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. "It's never too late to change," he said. "If you want to be part of something better, you can. But it's up to you." The gang leader nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. "Maybe," he said. "Maybe." The two of them sat in silence for a while, the tension between them gradually easing. The brother could sense that the man was wrestling with something deep inside, something he had buried for a long time. He didn't push, knowing that change had to come from within. Finally, the gang leader stood up, brushing off his pants. "I'll think about what you said," he said. "But don't think this means we're friends or anything." The brother smiled faintly. "I wouldn't dream of it." The man chuckled, a sound that was almost surprising coming from him. Then he turned and walked away, his boys falling in step behind him. The brother watched them go, feeling a strange mix of emotions. He didn't know if the gang leader would truly change, but he had seen a glimpse of something, a spark of humanity that had been buried under years of anger and regret. Laughter and learning, and the sense of unity spread to the streets and homes around it. People started looking out for each other, and the fear that had once gripped the neighborhood began to fade. The brother's sister thrived in the new environment. She had always been full of energy and curiosity, but now she had the confidence to chase her dreams. She joined the martial arts classes, becoming one of the most enthusiastic students. The brother watched her with pride, knowing that he had played a part in giving her the chance to grow and succeed. As for the brother, he continued to train and teach, passing on the lessons he had learned. He knew that the fight wasn't over, that there would always be challenges and setbacks. But he also knew that as long as they stood together, they could overcome anything. One evening, as the sun set over the park, the brother stood at the edge of the field, watching the kids and parents practice. The gang leader walked up beside him, his hands in his pockets. "You've done something amazing here," he said. "You've given people hope." The brother smiled faintly. "We've done something amazing," he corrected. "It's not just me. It's all of us." The gang leader nodded, a look of quiet pride on his face. "Yeah. I guess it is." The two of them stood there in silence, watching as the neighborhood came together. The brother felt a sense of peace and fulfillment that he hadn't felt in a long time. He knew that the journey wasn't over, but he also knew that they had taken the first step. And that was what mattered. As the stars began to appear in the sky, the brother turned to the gang leader. "Thank you," he said, "for giving this a chance." The man smiled faintly. "Thank you," he replied, "for showing me there's another way." The brother nodded, feeling a sense of closure and hope. He knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but he also knew that they were on the right path. Together, they had built something special, a community of strength, resilience, and hope. And as he walked home that night, the brother knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. Because that's what family and community was all about. As he walked home that night, the brother felt a sense of hope that he hadn't felt in a long time. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but he also knew that he wasn't alone. The neighborhood was changing, and so were the people in it. And maybe, just maybe, they could build something better together. The weeks that followed the conversation with the gang leader were a turning point for the neighborhood. The brother continued his martial arts classes in the park, and the sense of community grew stronger every day. Parents who had once been too afraid to let their kids outside now joined in, learning alongside their children. The park, once a place of fear and danger, had become a symbol of hope and unity. But the brother knew that real change took time. He had seen the spark of something in the gang leader's eyes that night, but he also knew that old habits were hard to break. He didn't expect miracles, but he held on to the hope that even small steps could lead to something bigger. One evening, as he was setting up for the class, he noticed a group of familiar figures approaching. It was the gang leader and a few of his boys. The brother tensed, unsure of what to expect, but the man's expression was calm, almost relaxed. He walked up to the brother and nodded. "Mind if we join?" he asked. The brother hesitated, surprised by the request. But then he nodded, stepping aside to let them join the class. The kids and parents watched nervously, unsure of what to make of the newcomers. But the brother kept his composure, treating them like any other students. He showed them the same respect and patience he showed everyone else, and slowly, the tension began to ease. As the weeks went by, the gang leader and his boys became regulars at the classes. At first, they were awkward and unsure, but over time, they began to relax. The brother could see the change in them, the way they carried themselves, the way they interacted with the others. It wasn't easy, and there were setbacks along the way, but they were trying. And that was what mattered. One evening, after the class had ended, the gang leader stayed behind. He waited until everyone else had left, then approached the brother. "I owe you an apology," he said, his voice quiet but sincere. "For everything. I was so caught up in my own anger and pride that I couldn't see what I was doing to this neighborhood. To myself." The brother nodded, accepting the apology. "It takes a lot of courage to admit that," he said. "But it's never too late to change." The gang leader smiled faintly. "You've taught me that. And I want to make things right. Not just for me, but for everyone." The brother felt a surge of pride and hope. He knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but he also knew that they were on the right path. Together, they could make a difference. The neighborhood continued to change, slowly but surely. The park became a place of